Hi, I'm Catherine Morgan from Point A to Point B Transitions. I'm a career transition expert and business consultant to consultants. Welcome to Evolving Working. I'm here with my co-host, Susan Eckstein. Susan.
I'm Susan Eckstein. I'm an empowerment expert, certified coach and facilitator. And in a nutshell, I help people stop shrinking so they can have the confidence to be seen, be heard, and take up space.
Hi, I'm Dawn Ellery, and I'm a total rewards leader in the corporate world who's trying to put a spotlight on mental health in the workplace and create a safer environment for people to work in.
I am so thrilled to have Dawn here today because one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I wanted to talk about these really important issues, including and especially mental health, because I'm in the middle of writing this book, This Isn't Working, Evolving the Way We Work to Decrease Stress, Anxiety, and Depression. So that's a lot of what we might cover today. And while I can talk about what I'm seeing with my clients, I do not know how this is playing out within corporate. And Dawn, you've been an HR professional for more than 20 years, correct?
Correct. About 25 years spent in HR and the total reward side that really deals with the benefits, helping employees around wellness, which luckily over the past 25 years, we've come leaps and bounds from where we started. We now consider wellness to include mental well-being. That's been huge for an acceptance perspective when you look at everybody in HR and in that corporate environment.
Is that across organizations or across the US or just within the organization that you're currently working for? Has it been widely accepted or is it just in like one vertical?
Yeah, I think when you look back at wellness started as physical. It started as the way for corporate America to reduce their medical cost, their medical claim cost. So let's work to get everybody healthier. Let's incent them. We've tried carrot, we've tried stick, we've done all of that. And then it slowly broadened past that to include your mental health, your community, your financial. Financial was probably the second one. So all of these pieces now go into most organizations' understanding of what the full employee looks like. How much that's supported within each organization is very personal to the organization, the culture, and the leadership. And I think when you're looking at that mental health support that you're talking about, Catherine, that is one that has blossomed over the past 2 years with the pandemic because leadership really has been forced. But it hasn't gone far enough. We all know.
Well, stress, anxiety, and depression were skyrocketing pre-pandemic in 2019. I'm sure nobody on this call and nobody listening to this is surprised that things haven't gotten any better as a result of 2 years of a global pandemic. So I think leadership was in some ways forced to do that. So beyond the, hey, we'll reimburse you for your gym membership that was part of the programs when I was back in corporate 13 years ago, now what does that look like for those of us who aren't in corporate? When they say they're supporting mental health, what are people actually eligible for?
That depends very much on an organization. And, you know, most of the information I see from studies and surveys talk about what people are hoping to implement next year, what they're thinking about. There's no hard and fast on what they've actually done. And I think, Susan mentioned before we got on, there is a huge disconnect between what organizational leadership thinks they're doing and what employees are actually feeling. And that has always existed. And, we think from a leadership perspective that we're awesome and our company is supportive and we are, there for our employees. And the work from home was a huge shift. That was, again, a forced shift. I would have loved if the corporate world could have made that shift on their own because it has had a significant impact on both well-being and productivity. I know we see, burnout and all of that, but I think that's always been there. I think we're now just able to, and we're affording people the room to talk about it, and made it okay and squelched some of the stigma, but by no means all, or closing in on that. So my last organization, we had Headspace. That was something that we provided, but we made it so it wasn't available for everybody. You had to ask for it. So for me, that's a barrier to entry.
Yeah,
So we'll provide it for you, but you have to ask for it first.
yeah, as a
We have
younger
our medical
worker, you
plan.
might not have that might be very scary and a barrier
Yes.
that is hard to get through. You know,
Exactly,
I-
exactly. And I think, we had our basic medical plan, which was very generous. It was a generous plan. And right before I left, I got in place an additional kind of something that sits above. Now, employee assistance programs, I know there's ones that are great out there. They're basically worthless. There's typically 2% participation.
I was just going to
They
say,
never
but nobody
coordinate.
takes advantage of them. They're happy to tell their relatives, oh, we have a great benefits package, includes our
Yes.
employee, but nobody uses it.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't like it when that is the first thing when someone says, what do you provide for mental health support? It's your medical plan and your EAP, and that was always enough. That was the standard. If you had that, you were providing enough benefits. So now you have companies like Headspace, you have Calm, you have Ginger, who's married to Headspace now. I put a group in called Spring Health. You have Talkspace. So there are all these providers that typically have a ground floor of coaching, and then you can opt up to a therapist, which we all know can take a month, 6 weeks to find one that you can get into, and you don't know whether you click. These organizations have all of those pieces. So, male or female, what's their specialty, what's their nationality, all of those things that can help you better connect with them. And God forbid you need a psychiatrist, you can get that appointment too. So that was in place before I left. I felt like I did something for the organization by getting that in there. It was 2% of medical spend for the year. That was the actual cost of that, which is not a lot at all.
No,
but huge
not when you
benefits
see
to
the
employees.
statistics for what depression costs and absenteeism.
Yes, absenteeism, presenteeism, medical, loneliness is now something that we're tracking. When you see the huge medical costs that are associated with loneliness, we've kind of compounded that because now we have people working from home, and you have some of those people who don't have anybody with them. And I know I kind of joke because I have a full house of, husband, kids, and dogs, where I'd like to switch with that person occasionally that has nobody. But when everybody's gone for me in a day, I miss them, and I do get lonely.
Yeah, but think about it. I'm sure you saw this when you were with your organization. Work from home is great for introverts or ambiverts, but for an extrovert who needs to bounce off people, it is a recipe for clinical depression. Like that.
Yeah.
It's not good
Yes.
for them. They did not do well.
No, and I think that was a very interesting aspect to the working from home, that leadership felt all of a sudden that they had this great glimpse into people's homes because they were looking at them on Zoom. We're still only showing you what we want you to see, just like at the office when we had to act like everything was fine in our glass, cubicles or offices. So none of that changed when we went home. It just put people who might have been escaping from their house because of situations there, it put them completely in there. I found that people would rather be performance managed out of their organization than to admit that they have something going on in their life that's distracting them from work. So that's where I kind of turn your mental health into a cry for help. So instead of looking at it from an HR perspective where Dawn suddenly is not performing well. Let's performance manage her. And that is a horrible experience for employees and managers.
Yeah, because mostly they set it up so you're guaranteed to fail. It's just a paper trail. I'm sorry, I've had some bad luck with this, with myself and with clients.
Completely. So in my last organization, I set myself up. I started doing health and wellness coaching. So I was not the performance management person. I was the person you could come to talk about health and wellness. So I was the HIPAA person. I was, nobody was getting the information you were coming to me with, and you were not going to be performance managed because of it. So we kind of created a little bit of separation there, because HR is a scary place to come to in a lot of organizations, unfortunately.
Yes.
I like the joke. What's the quickest way to quiet everyone down on the elevator? It's tell them that you work in HR.
I haven't heard that one. Susan, I know you've had some experience coaching your executive clients with anxiety and stress. What are you seeing on the side of the employee?
That they're afraid to talk to anybody about this, that they wish that going to their manager and saying, hey, I'm struggling, without, possibility of some ramifications to, oh, we can't invite, have this person travel, we can't do this, we can't do that. And they don't know where to go. They may or may not have a therapist, or they're talking to me, and I may or may not, be able to help them with what they're struggling with, but they feel sort of isolated because they don't know who they can talk to at work. And so, Dawn, if you know of an employee, if you are an employee who's struggling, who may or may not have a therapist, who knows that they need more support when it comes to their mental health, what advice would you say to somebody? Like, where should they start if they want to explore what the company might have to offer?
So the first place to look is your medical plan, and to know how to find a therapist. The coaching aspect, most companies unfortunately don't have this, but I find not everybody needs a therapist, but a lot of people need a coach to bounce things off of, right? To feel like you're not crazy about something. I have to say that when I had to tell somebody at work about my depression, it didn't go well. And I was telling an HR person. And I was in the middle of a breakdown, so I couldn't hide it, which is my normal. And I was on medication that was causing panic attacks. So now I am just outside of what I typically can manage. And so when I told that person that I suffer from depression, that is why you are so disengaged lately. That was number one.
That's helpful.
Number two was, if I'm noticing everybody else on your team is, we need to tell them, don't have to tell them what, but you have to tell them something. And then the third one, I'm trying to remember, it was like the 5 top things you don't say to someone as they're telling you and like sobbing, and not able to control their emotions.
Together is probably up there.
Yeah. So once I got myself together and I came back the next week and I said, I just want to revisit something you talked about. The third one was somebody had reached out to her to say that I hadn't responded to an email. So that must be the depression. So, I came back the next week and I said, the person you have here today, last week, is the same person that walked in here 3 years ago. This is me. It's always been me. There's nothing different. My lack of engagement has nothing to do with my depression and everything to do with my relationship with you.
Nicely
I
done.
don't, yeah. There was no acknowledgement to that. And I have to say that a lot of times I've felt like senior leaders in HR have needed to almost suppress their emotions and their feelings to get to that point in an organization and be taken seriously by other parts of the organization. So the finance, the CEO. We don't want the hysterical woman, right, in the HR role who, God forbid, has some emotions. So we've created this like emotionless, basically workplace where everything always has to be fine, okay, and not emotional. And it's not healthy.
It's not healthy and it's not human. And I hope that that's one of the benefits that 2020 and 2021 have brought, is that our BS meters are very finely tuned. And we know we've personally struggled. There isn't a human on the planet who didn't have some giant struggle during that time. And our friends and colleagues and family have struggled too. So I'm hoping there's a little bit more of a kindness and an understanding. How long that lasts, I don't know, but I wanted to tap into something you said about asking for help and where to look. People of color who feel in the workplace that they have to overperform compared to their peers, people who are aiming for executive seats or in executive seats, they don't want to be seen as weak. They don't want to ask for help. These are two things that are kind of bound to happen in this conversation. What's your guidance around that?
So, so when I came out to my last company, I would do it individually. So people who would come to me who were talking about, I would share with them in the hopes that that would allow them to feel comfortable, not ashamed. So I did that in front of a group of 60 people. They were portfolio managers. They were finance people, people who are not allowed to say, hey, I suffer from anxiety. I'm managing your $100 million account here. It's not just acceptable. Right. So while I was talking to them about mental health, and because their leader, who was probably the least emotional person, really got it. He asked me to come talk to his team because he could tell that they weren't doing well. Mm-hmm. So I said to them, you guys have known me for years now. I'm your HR person. I'm the person who can help you figure out how to get to a provider, but I'm also someone who suffers from depression, and I always have. And that doesn't make anything different from what you've known of me for 5 years. And I'm also someone who's recently walked through the process of finding a provider, knowing how difficult that is, asking for help, and knowing how difficult that is. After that meeting, I had
20 phone calls.
About 35% of his team reached out to me. And it was, thank you for sharing. I suffer from this. I now don't feel alone, and I don't feel like I have to hide it from everybody. We had the people come forward and say, how do I get help? Please tell me, what do I do? And then we had the last group, and the last group is the group that scared the crap out of leadership. And there were a couple individuals, this makes me upset because I have teenagers, who had brought children home from school after suicide attempts. Mm. Okay, so that, and nobody knew. So you had people who were functioning, doing their job, acting like everything was okay, and then dealing with that behind the scenes. So I think the idea that somebody could keep that under wraps scared them. And they wondered, what do we need to do? Which was a fire drill to how do we put this, new coverage in place? And how do we support these people and talk about it? So my suggestion was someone in leadership needs to start talking about it.
It has to be modeled from the top. It has to be modeled from the top.
It does, but not everybody is believable. Not everybody is authentic. They might be trying to be, but if you have a CEO, sometimes they're not. And it was an interesting conversation because half of leadership was women, and they all said, no, I'm not doing this. I had to take that away to be able to get to this point. So again, it became the one person who was kind of like the least of a real person before the pandemic. He started to become a person. Like, he would get on and you'd see his dog, and you just like, he just became more of an actual person to the entire organization, and he shared some things. So I think, Susan, to your question around where do you go, you need to talk to someone in your organization who you've seen be vulnerable, who you've seen share, who you've seen get upset in some way in a meeting. Obviously not like, yelling and screaming, but like able to show some emotion. That's what you need to find. You need to find those people, because those are the people who aren't going to judge you for having emotion and for not being okay. Yeah, it takes that sharing and that vulnerability. And I was telling you the story of, having a person who reported to me that had anxiety attacks when I didn't know what that felt like. And I wasn't as compassionate as I could have been. And then all of a sudden I started having them because of medication, and you can't function. And we used to function in a world where you were in a cubicle in your office, or I had a glass office. It's a little hard to have a breakdown while you're sitting in a glass office in the middle of your in your world there.
It's terrible. And I've done it. I've had the full-on breakdown. Not fun. Don't recommend it. I've also had a colleague who completely lost her stuff and ripped the phone out of the wall because of stress with her team. Our manager, to his credit, walked by, said, looked at it, said, I'll call facilities, and walked back to his office.
But that is the time when you need to say, like, what can I do to help? What do I need? And when I started looking at performance and mental health, and I'm speaking not specifically mental illness, but mental health in general. We all have mental health, right? It's not specific to people who have a mental illness. We give people a pass when someone starts to have performance issues. So I start missing deadlines, like little things, you don't even notice them, and you start picking up the person's work. And I had an employee who, like, you didn't even realize it. And I talk to managers, and as an HR person who deals with managers and performance, and they come into your office and they're like, I need to fire so-and-so. Like, okay, what happened? And it was always a little thing, but it was just the buildup. And all of a sudden that one little thing happened and they're ready to fire them. I'm like, okay, so what conversations? No conversations. We've never even talked about it. It's not been on a review. We're lucky if we've had a review. Okay, so let's start with those conversations. So my advice and my training to managers is, start to notice when you start to give people that pass, when you start picking up the work, when you start making the excuses because we don't want to call people on it, right? But that's the point when people need help. That's the point where they've started to drop things because there's other stuff going on in their life and they might need your help. So instead of giving them a pass and kind of ignoring it until it gets to the point where you're ready to fire them, you deal with it in the beginning.
And I would think for some managers, that's going to be hard because, always having a difficult conversation is hard. But, even if they think that there's something going on, they don't want to say, how do you even ask? Even if you notice that somebody might be struggling, or maybe they're withdrawn, or maybe they do seem anxious, or maybe, somebody who used to always have their Zoom camera on, all of a sudden is showing up in calls and the Zoom camera is off. What does that mean? How do I ask somebody, is there something going on? How are you? all of those things, having a difficult conversation about, work performance is stressful enough. Now trying to ask questions about what might be going on and how can I support you? That I think would be even a whole other area of stress that a lot of managers they don't know how to have those conversations.
Exactly. We don't train our managers. So we take all of this money we spend on culture and our values, and we put it in the hands of people who have no basis to be managers. They were awesome at whatever they did. They were promoted to be a manager. We don't know their people skills. They're now responsible for other people and basically their mental health. Employees are looking to their managers to support their mental well-being. That scares me to death because I know we don't train managers. We don't emotional difficulty. I have a screenshot that I have in one of my presentations, and it talks about difficult conversations, and it asks managers, and the top one, they don't even like to communicate. They don't even want to talk to people, period. It was like 78% don't even want to have a conversation, much less a difficult conversation. And we've scared managers into, and then there's reason for this, right? Discrimination, all of those things that managers do, people do. And now we're asking them to have these conversations about people's personal lives, right? And they don't jive unless we're training people on how to have conversations, how to be comfortable. Yeah, I had one woman who ended up with me on a health and wellness coaching, and then her manager's coming to me because of issues around her job. And then 6 months later, after we were kind of getting to the point where she just wasn't a good fit for the organization, her values had changed and she wanted to do something else. She finally told them, so you have two middle-aged married guys, and we have this 30-something-year-old woman, and she says, I am just getting out of an abusive marriage. They did not know what to say. They just sat there and stared at her. And this was like, it wasn't everything, but hugely impactful on her performance. And she hadn't told them. It had been months she had been going through stuff with them. So Susan, completely agreed. There needs to be training around these difficult conversations, but I'm sorry, most of us, I'm going to say most of us are human. We're human, right? Most of us have feelings. I tell people to think about some time when your job wasn't your 100% focus. Something else was happening, good, bad, but your job wasn't your 100% focus, and put yourself into that mind frame. My one employee who was going through a horrible divorce for about 12 months during the pandemic, she didn't tell us. I knew something was going on. Her performance was sliding. I do exactly what I counsel other people not to do, was picking up the slack for her, and finally got to the point. And that's where the point where I had the kind of come to Jesus conversation of, I know something is wrong. I know you're trying to cover it. I know you don't want to share it, and you don't have to, but it is impacting your job. And we're at a point where you could lose your job over this. She came clean, and she had been going through a horrible divorce with that person living with her for the past year. So it changed how I knew I needed to manage her. I knew that she was distracted. I knew I had to micromanage her a little bit, which I don't like to do that. Some managers do. I don't like it. But I knew I had to do that to help her get through that. But I also asked her, I said, had I not kept pressing you, would you have allowed me to fire you without? She's like, yep. So she would have much rather lost her job than told me that she was going through some horrible thing. As a society, we like to look at the train wreck. We like to watch the people on TV going through stuff that's probably not even real. But I guess, I don't know what the experts would say. Does it make us feel better about ourselves if somebody else's job and life is kind of on the rocks. It makes us feel like ours isn't so bad. I don't know. I don't like that
I
analogy
don't, I
at all.
don't, I don't think in this case that's it. I think what it ties back to is separating the person from the professional at work. We weren't supposed to take our work home. We weren't supposed to take our personal life to work. I did a TEDx talk on this. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. We are people. We're messy humans. We have messy human lives, and we're also professionals. And I keep hoping that there's going to be some way to work on this that is not invasive, that respects people's privacy. My gut feeling is the support for this has to be outside the organization. It has to be a third party. I don't know if people are going to trust an internal resource not to share information or not to potentially turn on them. What's your thought about that?
No, agreed. And that's why, putting Spring Health in place was the third party, coaches, all of that. None of that information gets back to the organization. There's always a small piece of the population who doesn't even believe that if you have a third party, there's still, that's the same problem why employee satisfaction surveys don't work. You tell people you're getting aggregate information, they still don't believe you.
I don't believe it.
So yeah,
Raise your hand.
completely agree. A third party. For me, my health and wellness coaching was people that felt comfortable with me and wanted to have that. But I agree, I don't see many of me in HR. There's more of the performance management style in HR. And bottom line profit, and not enough of how do we support the person, because as we were talking about, the statistics prove that if you spend $1, you get $5 back, around mental health support, around whatever type of wellness support you want to put in place. It's there. It's just a question of getting the buy-in from the organization, and typically either very top or the financial side.
Well, we're seeing more chief well-being officers or some variation of that in organizations. I don't know if it's lip service, but it seems to me to be going in the right direction. How do you feel about that?
I agree. You see all the large organizations, and I had seen a stat, and I don't know if it's still true, but most people are employed by small employers. So
It's
while
always
you
been like
see,
that. It's always been like
yeah,
that. Small to
okay,
mid-sized business is the bulk of employers, certainly in the US.
yeah, so okay, so that was a novelty to me, like probably 10 or 15 years ago when I saw it. And so I don't know that the bulk of the country is getting that support. It's for the organizations that need to be seen as leaders, because most corporate America are followers, and they will only do something if they've seen it in a survey, if they've seen it by whoever their competitors
Catalyst,
are. They don't,
HBR, Mercer, Forrester, Gartner.
yes, they don't want to go out on a limb and get to know their population and see what they need for them. And so can I read you a quote?
Please.
These disorders, it's talking about mental health, together with anxiety, depression, and stress, have a definitive impact on any working population and should be addressed within that context. They may also develop into long-term disorders with accompanying disability. Given the fact that numerous affordable interventions exist, the time has come to challenge both the low priority given to mental health and the stigma that those with mental health illness still endure around the world.
Amen.
Can you guess when that quote was?
1935.
It was from 2000, and it was a World Health Organization Mental Health in the Workplace Summit. So that was 20 years ago. We've literally done nothing.
Okay, well, we
Nothing.
should be getting around to doing it now. We're slow learners. We don't change. What would
Yes.
you add to the conversation, Susan? What's been your experience with your clients or anything personally that you'd like to share?
Well, I think that talking about it with people you trust and just opening up a dialogue about this issue, I think that, you know, with social media, I mean, people have become more and more disconnected. There's less intimacy, there's less talking, everything is through an app, and that's how people communicate now. And I just think asking people, you know, how are you doing today? And checking in with people. You know, I've heard so many people say, you know, you're the only person I've ever told this to, because there's this embarrassment that people have to look like they have everything put together when they really don't. And I just think normalizing having conversations about, you know, I'm struggling, I need help, I need support, and I'm here for you too, is just something that we need to get back to, because I just know it from, you know, in recent years, you know, there's just been less and less connection. And if we're willing to reestablish that connection with people, that, you know, will create a safe environment for some of these conversations and start to normalize it. Because if you know, if we're not having these kind of conversations with our friends and our family, we're certainly not having it. Even with our therapists, we're certainly not having it at work, and we need to normalize that again.
That's a good point. And we can be the change we want to see. It takes a heaping helping of courage some days. But I did this with a professional networking group meeting. They're like, "How are you doing, Catherine?" And I'm like, "I'm not well. I'm really having a hard time." And I did that in my coaching group. Susan was on the call, and I'm like, "No, really, how are you doing?" Because I'm raising hand. It was February. I was having a really hard time. And I'm just like, not doing well. I'm here for you guys. I'm going to support you as much as I can, but I'm not well. 3 other people raised their hand. They're like, "Yeah, not good." Not doing good, not sleeping well, not whatever it was. But I think what I found is when I lob it out there, if I'm not doing well, a lot of other people are probably struggling too. Like there seems to be a wave to these, and somebody else is going to say, "Oh my God, thank you for really asking." Because they'll say, "How are you?" They say, "I'm doing fine." I'm like, "Real fun." Or they'll say, "Catherine, how are you?" And I'll say the real answer or the "I'm fine" answer. And they're like, the real answer? Yeah. And sometimes the real answer is, I'm doing pretty well today. I got a new client. I'm happy, something good happened. Sometimes it's not so good.
Yeah.
But I think if we start being the change we want to see, you'll be surprised how many people say, "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you." Or that's been my experience.
Agreed.
Yeah, me too.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. Dawn, thank you so much for sharing the insider scoop from inside HR. I feel like I've been behind the curtain.
Thanks for having me, ladies. Appreciate it.